All right, well, good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Heavyweights podcast, an interview edition. It's the new year. This is our first interview of the new year. Super excited. Man, we got started with this podcast last year. We've already had 25 episodes, and by the time this comes out, I think this will be number 27 maybe. And so, man, just so blessed to have been able to launch that last year, and we have a lot of plans for this year. So thank you so much for tuning in. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. I found out some people were listening I had no idea about, which is really cool, and just really excited. So today is another episode where we have an amazing interview. And so today we have a friend of mine for several years, and a good friend of my wife's, and her husband and I have been concert buddies for several years, and we wanted to bring on a good friend, Jessica Starr. How's it going, Jessica?
Great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I'm surprised to hear you have not done a podcast yet, because honestly, so a little background, Jessica and I guess before we get started too much, Tavis, how are you doing? Tavis is with us. He's not floating on a boat today.
I am here. I'm
What's up, Tavis?
back 2 feet on the ground, so I'm good. And
Yeah.
I was going to comment that I'm impressed that and Ashton must have been very excited to have Jessica on the show today, because he is wearing a collared button-up shirt.
Yeah.
Looking
He's
good.
not
Looking
wearing
good.
he's not wearing his normal sweatshirt. So and he doesn't even have
No.
a hat on today. So you should feel
New
very
year.
privileged that he
Oh,
dressed
yeah.
up for you.
That's right. New year, new you, and by you I mean me. I'm trying to, put a little bit more presentation out there. So, but yeah, Tavis has been floating in the Caribbean for a week. We'll on our Friday
Nice.
podcast, which we're going to record a little bit later today. We'll dive into that. But Tavis has a tan for a reason. He's drinking coffee for a reason, because he actually evidently became addicted to coffee on his trip there a little bit. So, so Jessica, why don't you start out, and why don't you? I know you have an architecture background, and why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a journey into how you got where you are now, and we'll kind of go into what you're doing these days in the business and what it's grown into
Okay.
on Instagram. But how did you get started with all this?
Well, like you said, I do have an architecture background. I have a master's in architecture, and I actually worked in very high-end residential architecture after college and grad school for a few years, doing multi-million-dollar houses. And I developed quite the champagne taste, which does not go along with my budget. So when we wanted to build our first house back in 2006, 2007, our budget was just not there, and we owner built. I designed the house, and then we did it again back in 2019. We built again our house, and I shared pictures from that build on Instagram, and I was getting lots of followers and getting lots of comments and DMs, and pretty much at least weekly, if not daily, I was getting requests for our floor plan online,
Yeah.
like in my DMs and in the comments. And so we kind of talked about it, and we decided to start selling this floor plan of this house that I live in. And then it sort of grew from there. I now have several floor plans. And I also, when people buy the floor plan, they ask me to make little modifications to it here and there. And so I do spend a lot of time doing that. And then also we, in 2020, prices went up, and people kept coming to me and saying, it's so expensive to build right now. Can we cut the square footage? We had already gone through, modifications process to make this the perfect house for them. And then they go and get it bid, and it's so expensive because of the building prices. And they're like, well, we need to cut off like a quarter of this house to be able to afford it. And
Right.
that's heartbreaking for me. It's heartbreaking for them. And so we decided to put together our experience from our owner building experiences into a program to help people save that 25% instead of cutting off 25% of their house.
Sure.
So that's something that we're now doing. So,
Yeah, cool. Pause 1 second, Jessica. Your video went away again while you were talking,
oh
so
no.
it might be recording on your end. I honestly, it's hard for me to tell, but I just, if we can do anything to get video, obviously I would love it for us and for you. And but if we just have audio and that's all, it gets totally fine. We can do it's
Okay.
totally fine. But
Let me
I
look
did
at my
notice it went
camera.
away.
It
Let's
said
see.
something
Does
about
it?
her
It's showing up on yours.
connection.
My internet.
Yeah, you sound good, but something about the video is just not agreeing with
I
the
have a
connection
different
right now.
computer I can use if we need to.
I don't think it's
It's
probably the
probably okay.
computer, if I had to guess.
It
Yeah,
says it's recording in high quality.
in
So
high
I mean, as long as
quality.
we have the audio,
Yeah,
I think that's the big. That's the big
yeah,
thing.
audio is great, and if it might be recording video on your side, we just can't see it because
Okay.
sometimes Tavis will be really grainy or I'll be grainy, but
Yeah.
whenever it comes out on the other end, it's really clear because it actually is recording locally on your computer, and then
Okay.
it uploads to Riverside. So we'll just have to see how it is, and so
My picture
we'll do
hasn't gone
audio.
away, so maybe
Okay.
that's a good sign.
Yeah, maybe yours is good, and it's just for some reason a black screen on our side. So, um, okay, well, cool. We'll get started back. So, all right, well, that's like a ton to unpack there. So, why don't let's rewind just a little bit. So,
Okay.
I know. Whenever well, first of all, you guys had a rental house up in the colony at some
Yep.
point. Is that right? Did y'all?
We did.
Was that
Yeah.
y'all's house that you just house
No.
hacked and you just kept it, or?
No. We actually did have a house in the colony. Our first house that we bought was in the colony, but it
Okay,
wasn't the one that we used as the rental house. We bought the rental house
okay.
later on. Um,
And then y'all had that, but then so after that is when you custom built your house out in it was out in the country a little bit, north of Dallas. Is that
yeah,
right?
it was in Farmersville, so east of
Farmsville. Okay.
McKinney, halfway between McKinney and Greenville. And we had
Okay.
82 acres,
Oh wow.
we built a, I want to say all together because it had like a mother-in-law wing. So my mom lived in like she had her wing, and then we had two guest houses with a bathroom, and then our part of the house. So it was probably altogether about 5,000 square feet.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I designed that. We owner built that, and we sold it in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the custom land that y'all built the next time was out in Granbury on the
Mhm.
lake, and it's beautiful. We've been out there. Like I said, our families have known each other for a while. Y'all have had a bunch of people out there and had some parties, and it's great. And you
Yeah.
do such a good job of documenting it on Instagram. And that's, a few years ago, you log on to Instagram, it's like, oh, Jessica and Cody's house looks great. And then it's, wow, these are really good pictures. And then there's, holy cow, she's getting quite a following. And then you talk to Cody 2 weeks ago. It's like, hey, what's up? He's like, I don't know. I may quit my job relatively soon and help Jessica out. I was like, what the heck? It's like,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable to see the progress of everything. So,
Yeah.
Tavis, I want to ask you this too, but I'll ask Jessica first. So, super curious because I would love to do some new build at some point. That's a goal of mine, at least once, to do a new build on a lot somewhere, and do an infill type lot. So, whenever you're starting out, of course, if you had all the land and you had an unlimited budget, that's one thing. But most people have restrictions of either lot size or budget or both.
Mhm.
So, what are the first three or four things when you're sitting down to really think through a project? Like, where do you start creatively, or do you start more with the actual hard facts? Okay, what are we working with, and we work backwards. So, what is your thought process on that sort of thing?
You definitely have to have kind of an overall budget, knowing what you can afford. If you're planning to live there and pay the mortgage, every month, you need to know, obviously, that you can afford it. Um, so, and then I would start with the land because often it's difficult to match a piece of land to a floor plan. It's much easier to find the piece of land and find the right floor plan for that land. Say there's a view out the back. I'm sorry, the dog.
You're fine.
If there's a view out the back you want to take advantage of, you want to find a floor plan that takes advantage of that. If you're facing if you've got two close neighbors and tight setbacks, you need to make sure that your plan is going to fit. So I would say definitely you want to find your land first, then your floor plan. And, I also get a lot of people asking me, how do I know how much a floor plan is going to cost to build? And basically, we just kind of start with ballpark numbers. You have an estimate, and you can call builders in the area, you can call realtors in the area and find out what's the average cost per square foot in this area for, a mid to high end, home. Probably they can give you a low, middle, and high end range, and you can sort of figure out where you fall in there. So that'll give you, okay, that's the number of square feet. And that number is from the realtor, the builder, and that's the cost to build with a builder.
So Tavis, on your end, I know you've done this before, so kind of, I'm sure it's similar, but what are your thought processes when you're starting out a new build like that?
I've got lots of questions for Jessica, just because we have,
yeah.
It's similar experiences for sure. So I think, it's important for people to understand. One is, and this is interesting. I'd like to hear it from your perspective. When you're calculating dollar per foot, are you calculating an overall number based on the gross square footage that you're coming up with, or are you doing a net square footage and then cutting that in half for the gross square footage when you include garages and covered patios, et cetera? How do you normally calculate that? In the past, when I've built from the ground up, for me, it was easier just to kind of figure out total cost, total square footage under roof, and figure that number out. But I've noticed over the years it's confusing when you talk to other builders and you talk to other developers that sometimes that number's off, right? They're using it based on the net square footage versus the gross square footage, and that can be confusing. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that's important for people to understand, because that's something that in traditional real estate or when we think investment real estate and use ARV, we're using net square footage to figure out value, right?
Yeah, heated square footage, right? That's kind of net is what you're talking, like heated square footage usually?
Living area?
Heat and AC, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Usually when we're doing the ballpark, we're looking at living area, and then we kind of add a percentage. So they say it's $100 a square foot. That's just a number I'm throwing out. Then you might add like $60 per square foot for garage and porches or something like that. So
got it. So you're doing it based on a percentage value, or cutting that number down for the additional spaces. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, because if
I
you're
would
doing it off
imagine
of net square footage, the dollar per foot is going to be higher.
Go ahead,
right?
Thomas.
Right.
I was saying, if you're doing it based on just the net square footage, then your dollar per foot essentially is going to be higher when you're looking at cost to build versus looking at it from the gross perspective, but you're leaving square footage out. So it's important, like if you're doing an analysis on a vacant piece of property, for instance, and you say, okay, we're going to buy the lot for $300,000 and we're going to build a 4,000 square foot home, you're leaving out, covered patios, you're leaving out garage space, things like that. So it can be misleading sometimes, depending on what that dollar per foot is that you're using. That can be a big variance that somebody may lose or miss out. So kind of what she's saying is, Jessica's saying, if you were going to do that, then let's say that you're building a 4,000 square foot home, then you have another 1,000 square feet between a 3-car garage and and covered porches, covered patio, which is obviously very popular these days to have these outdoor living spaces. And so in that case, you would calculate, hypothetically, $100 a foot at, the 4,000 square feet. Then you would calculate like $60 a foot for those additional spaces, right? So that's kind of what she's saying there. What I've done in the past is just blend those two together and figure out my total square footage is about 5,000 feet, and then figure out that dollar per foot number that fit that, right? which would be lower. Let's say that the average price is $200 a foot. So my number might be somewhere around like 175 versus 200 a foot. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep.
So, okay. Well, that was good. I mean, that's something that a lot of people miss. And, you know, Ashton's talked about it before. Just how do you calculate the numbers when you're looking at raw land and building from the ground up? You know, and
Right.
it's similar to the sense that you have to work backwards. We need to know what the back end's going to be, whether it's, you know, all, you know, budget mindset, you know, from the consumer, just what can I afford to spend? How am I going to build it? You know, what's the capital? What's the lending requirements that I'm going to do? And then, you know, what's it going to take to build it, right? And what's the
Right.
value going to be compared to the cost to build it?
Right. When y'all are doing your renovations and the work that y'all are doing, are y'all hiring contractors, like a general contractor? Or are you just directly hiring subcontractors?
So I've been very fortunate over the years. I basically have a full blown GC business, even though I'm not customer or retail facing. Primarily, I've kind of pulled away from that when I developed the GC side of my business. It was built to support the projects that we bought or we purchased, and then we were going to renovate and sell those. Eventually, that turned into bigger projects, bigger renovations, and then ground up stuff, custom homes that we built as well. But in to this day, I have about 36 different subs that work for me, which works really well from the sense that Ashton and I talk about this quite a bit because he started off and he's, you know, hired a couple GCs. And when you have a bad GC, you know, it makes it very difficult to interchange that GC depending on how far along the project is, how much money you've already given in draws, you know, all of those different things. So when you do sub it out, right, you have the ability to say, okay, my electrician, this is 3 strikes, he's out, I need a new electrician. And you can interchange that person or interchange that company, if you will, and makes it much easier to be able to manage the project when you have these different trades. What I've learned over the years is, you know, you need to know the quality of the trades that you're working with, and sometimes, you know, spending more, you know, for the right quality and the right trade is gonna be much more efficient on your time by getting the right person in there. I've also overpaid with people that were terrible before, you know, that had a great name behind them, and I'm like, I'm paying way too much for this company, and they're terrible.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
and I know
trying to find that perfect match.
Oh, sorry. There's a little bit of
Jessica,
lag between Tavis and I. So,
Jessica, talk a
hold on
little
a second.
bit about
So,
how you mentioned that you had the architectural background, obviously masters in that. Congrats to you. That's amazing. And then working for some high end custom builds, I'm sure you've seen and done a lot of different things, and obviously been able to kind of cherry pick the things that you love and don't like, and then kind of create a style, right? I think every designer, architect has kind of a style that they are fascinated with, even though you have the ability to do many different styles. For me, like I'm fascinated with mid-century modern architecture, and the stuff I built were influenced with that design in mind. And so, you know, even though I could do a lot of different things, or I kind of follow, you know, when we do a lot of renovations, it's following what the architect gave me to start with, right? So it's like trying to play off of what that original architectural style is, and then try to adapt to that with some new trends and some new things that are, you know, modernizing it, but still staying within the means. You know, you don't get into a 70s contemporary home and start putting a bunch of arches, right?
Right. Some people try, though.
You see competition. You see a lot of competition doing that.
Yeah.
But, you know, so interesting, like with you, like you said, you took this in your own personal experience, ran through it, and figured out, like, okay, you know, people have these budgets. How do you cut this 25%? You know, so given a little bit of insight of kind of where where you're coaching, where your business has morphed into, and kind of how that works. And I'm also curious, just
Okay.
in how you guys also charge, because I do design work as well for people, and so it's kind of always a, do you do it by dollar per foot? Do you do it by the hour and the time that you have in the deal? And so that's interesting as well. So go ahead.
Okay. So the way we save people that 25%, and that's just an estimate, is basically by being their owner builder instead of hiring a GC. We teach them how to hire all the subs themselves and the process, and you know giving them the framework to go by so that they can feel confident and empowered to do that. And also a big aspect of that is, maybe we can get into this, getting a construction loan and finding those subcontractors, because a lot of subcontractors kind of get plugged in with a GC like you, and they don't want to take a one-off job here and there. So we sort of give them guidance in those aspects and help them basically all through the process. And we lay out the entire process, what you need to be doing at this step, what you need to be doing at this step, and how to plan. Most of it is all in the planning, right? Y'all probably know this. Like, most of it happens before you even break ground, and then it's just kind of overseeing, right? So we teach them basically how to do that. And if they do it themselves, they can save at least 25%. But also, if they are good shoppers, they find sales for appliances and fixtures, they can save even more. And
Got it.
so that's
So
one way that we go ahead.
So high level, I mean, typical builder fee would be 25%, right? So that's it. Is that
Right.
kind of where you're getting that number from?
Right.
To say, if you cut out
Exactly.
the supervisor, if you cut out the builder
Right.
slash GC in the deal, and you're able to hire all these trades yourself and follow our steps,
Right.
then that's where you can save money by not hiring that GC or that builder, right? And sometimes that's beneficial because, again, you're able to schedule, trades at your timelines versus, waiting on the builder to move his schedule around. If he's trying to
Right.
finish out a big job or a big build, he's got all of his trades loaded up over there. And that's where you have the delays, right? That's where people
Right.
get bogged down, and you have, you poured the slab and now you're waiting 3 months for a lumber package to show up, and you're
Right.
going, what's going on?
Right. And that's one thing that we tell our clients is, a builder may have several projects going on, and you are going to be focused on this one project, and it's your house. And so you're very invested in it. You're going to make sure that it's going to be built right and built the way you want it to be built, and it's your one focus. You're not, here, there, and everywhere. So you can do this.
Sure.
And
So
now, what's some of the pushback that you get with, that the biggest thing I see, right, is just the consumer that you're trying to teach this to say, hey, become your own builder, become your GC. How do these people do this while maintaining their
regular
normal
job.
lifestyle?
Yeah.
Because it is extremely detailed oriented and very
Mhm.
time consuming. And
Right.
I've known it, part of the reason I don't do retail, facing, builds for people. I do design work because I can do that part and say, here you go. Here's the design, put it together. Now go bid it out with your GC or your builders or whoever you want. But I'm kind of hands off at that point, because when I have helped, facilitated, consumers, one of the biggest issues is getting them to make decisions, right?
Right.
Is trying to get them to see the vision, plan ahead. This is what you need to do. And that's even just, when there is a builder involved, then they can do their normal job. But, you make a phone call and you're like, hey, I need a decision on this, or what do you want to do with this? I don't know. I'm going to talk to my, husband or wife when I get home, and, we'll get back to you tomorrow. And then it's like 2 or 3 days
later.
go by and you follow up. And that's just
Yeah.
even on the design side. Sometimes I'm sitting there like, okay, what do you guys want to do with this? We're taking a foot away from here. Or, do you want to lose a foot on the balcony, or do you want to lose a foot in the closet? Which one do you want, right? To make the bedroom bigger, right? And sometimes those small decisions are like so hard for them to make the decision on, and it takes a couple days, and then they get upset when there's delays on getting the plans done because now you've moved on to another plan, and you're like, I got to circle back. So, talk a little bit on that, because that's interesting that you've taken on this really extreme challenge, even though you're doing a great service. I know.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing that you're doing.
I definitely run into that more with my design clients where, I'm making modifications on their floor plans and they want to, the hardest thing to do is when they say, I like this floor plan, but we need to shrink it down, just scale everything down by like 25%. And that's not easy. Because walls are a certain size, toilets are a certain size, everything still has to fit, and there's codes to make sure, you don't have, 2 inches in front of your toilet. So that's a difficult thing to explain to clients. It's not just like hit the 25% scale button and it just shrinks it all down. It doesn't do it that way. So, but I do kind of lay out ahead of time how the process should go. I say, we kind of have a preliminary design phase, and then we have, and since I'm just doing little modifications, usually it's a little simpler, but I try to eliminate the back and forth in all the decisions. So once they give me the list, I kind of go through and I get clarifications on the list of what they want to change. And like if they're saying, shrink this bathroom, take out this closet, then I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do with that space in that closet? And I kind of find that all out at the beginning, all in one, usually an email, so I have it in writing. And but I also in that email kind of lay out the process and say, here's the changes I'm going to make. And then I'll give you, a review of it. And then if there's anything else we need to tweak from there, that's kind of the second part. And then the third part is that I make the construction documents. And just kind of laying out that process kind of eliminates the do this one little thing, and then I go and ask a question, and then it takes them a week to get back, and then do this one little thing, and then I show it to them, and then it takes a week to get back. So we kind of try to lay it all out, get everything on the table in the beginning. And then I kind of, I think through how things are going to snowball. If I change this, how's that going to affect this, this, and this? And then I try to lay that out for them and make sure that we have all those decisions made right in the beginning. So we all know everything that's going to be affected. And then I get to work. So that really helps.
Ashton,
and then another question you asked earlier.
Yeah. So I've got a couple questions about this because going back in my sister is a decorator in Austin, and this is one of the things she runs into is just the back and forth of just, hey, I want to make this little change. Okay. And then, but that changes things downstream, and it really can become tedious. But I would say, one thing that you have going for you, and I know Tavis has had a little bit of this, is that once you get established and you have a presence online and people can see what you're bringing to the table and you have kind of a brand, I would think it would be a little bit easier for them to trust, okay, I like this plan. Let's make a few modifications. Let's just go with it. You know what you're doing. This looks beautiful. Let's go with it.
Absolutely.
As opposed to someone who's starting out, it's just wide open and we can do that and we can do that. And, so I would think that has helped. The longer you go and the more of a brand you have, that's probably helped you out a little bit. Right, Jessica? You
are exactly right. And I definitely, I have it all the time where I'm on a Zoom with a client and they're like, oh my gosh, I trust whatever you do. I know you're going to do it great because I've seen your work. And so that is such a huge help. Occasionally, one time recently, I had a lady, I don't know how she found me, but she didn't, have that trust built in. She didn't follow me on Instagram. She didn't, I don't know, she probably some random search, she somehow found me, but she didn't have that trust built in. And I think she maybe was a narcissist, but it was an uphill battle the whole way. It was awful. And so I definitely think having that image, having your trust already built in when you start working with a client is so important.
Yeah. Well, and so two things. I want to double back, but just real quick about scale. And I've talked to Tavis about this. And when I go into a house that's professionally decorated and designed, and it's scale is so important. And I feel like it's really overlooked. And when you say someone just wants you to push the 25% reduction, that for them, it just seems really easy. But scale, Tavis and I were just talking about another builder that we've seen a lot of their work, and their style is this wide open kind of modern box, and it's not my style. Some people like it, but one of the things that just seems off is the scale of the ceilings is almost too high to be any sort of practical. The cabinets are really, really tall. I'm like, how, I'm tall. I can't use the top 3 shelves there. Like, what's the point? What's the point of a 10-foot wide hallway? Or, so when you have that experience and you can actually speak to, hey, I know on paper this would make sense just to delete this, but you're going to like it this way,
Right.
actual having that design eye. I think that's where the professional experience, and that's where that really is where it shows up, is knowing, okay, this is going to feel right once we're done. Just trust me in this process.
Right. Right. And I think that's where we have to understand that we hire people for their expertise. I don't try to do plumbing myself. I hire a plumber because I don't know about plumbing. And so when you hire a designer, you need to trust that that designer knows about scale. And you need to, if you're going to change something that's going to change the scale of a room, you need to trust that your designer may have some input about that. And I do. Like, if somebody wants to change something and I have a concern, I say, look, here's the pros and cons of this. I'm going to let you decide, but in my opinion, this is not going to work. And I try to give an alternate solution. So
Sure. Yeah.
it's you, and then
So I got a question about the subs. So I wanted to double back just a little bit,
Okay.
because when you were talking about subs, I was having flashback nightmares about, because when you're talking about one off. So what's interesting about Tavis, and we actually had a guy, Mark Fuller, on, he has a whole full-time crew. They know his style. They know exactly how to walk into a house, start demoing. This is what I'm going to tear out. And then it's just really like clockwork. So when you're doing one-off stuff, and when I started out, and I'm first hiring a tile guy, and I'm first hiring a sheetrock guy, and I'm having to explain some of these details, it can be a little bit tedious, and especially to make sure that they're able to kind of, execute on your design and all this sort of thing. So how do you educate people? Like, what tips can you give people, either whether it's a first-time flipper or someone who's doing their first time as a GC for their own custom house? Like, how do they go about finding a really good contractor? Are they looking at Facebook groups? Are they going to Home Depot on a Saturday to see who's busy and who's there? Do you find one really good guy and get some references? I've found that the jack of all trade guy is a horrible idea. So I will throw that out there. If you are working with Jessica, do not go find a jack of all trade who says every time you ask him, can you do this? He said, yes, yes, yes. It will not go well. It sounds really convenient and awesome. It will not go well. So how do y'all educate people to find good contractors? Because most likely this is the only time they're going to do this. Right. Maybe every 7 years, maybe every 15 years. And so there's not going to be this momentum between projects.
Right. We actually give them a list of like 10 different ways or 12 different ways to find subcontractors. And, it's kind of a collection of all the different ways. And then we sort of give them the red flags to look out for. Like, you don't want the guy who doesn't answer any of your phone calls, because when you're like in the middle of building and he disappears, you don't want to have to call him 10 times to get a hold of him. Or the one that just doesn't listen to you and what you're looking for, and he just does whatever he wants. Like, you have to look out for certain red flags. But we also tell people for how to find them. Like, on the list is realtors can be a good resource. Definitely like Facebook groups, but not the Facebook groups you would think. Maybe like a mom's group. Because, the moms have hired plumbers, they've hired electricians, they've had these issues come up. They needed a, drywall patch. So they may have painters, things like that. So That's one resource. The biggest help that I think is your personal network, because if you go to church with Johnny the plumber, then he's going to want to do a good job for you. And then from there, once you find a good subcontractor that you connect with and that you're kind of feeling good about, you can ask that subcontractor for other subcontractors that he's worked with in the past that he has seen good work from. And you can get sort of your list starting to roll from there. And then just ask them, okay, so your framer might know a trim carpenter. So then you can ask around about that trim carpenter. And always, 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 we say get references. So find out, ask around about that person, not just ask them. Yeah. So say you're hiring Johnny the plumber. Don't ask Johnny. You can ask Johnny the plumber for his references. Definitely do that and call them, but also ask other people about Johnny the plumber. So
right.
That's definitely something we recommend. Does that help?
So I want Tavis to talk a little. Oh yeah, for sure. So why don't we talk a little bit about, unless Tavis has something on that, but I know, Jessica, you alluded to the financing part, and I think this will blend together in this way. Jessica, Tavis, his record keeping is immaculate, and he has a really good system on paying his subs, and he trains them. Okay, I pay on Fridays, but I only pay you if you've given me an invoice. And then, so Tavis, why don't you talk a little bit about that process? So if people are listening that are Jessica's folks that are maybe thinking about custom building, how you actually manage the flow of money and invoices, and then how that goes into the financing, because we use hard money or bank money where they give us chunks of money at a time for construction. And then Jessica, why don't you talk about what's kind of a typical financing setup for the new build? So Tavis, talk a little bit about how you manage the finances for your subs.
Yeah, so I did have a couple questions though for Jessica, just regarding
okay.
Timelines, right? So because what you're talking about and teaching these guys to do this on a one-off, it sounds very time consuming for you, for one, because I'm sure you get a lot of phone calls with the past clients that you're teaching this, right? And I'm sure you get plenty of phone calls that people are stuck or they're in a position. And one thing I just wanted to highlight too, Ashton, just where I was saying, does this sound familiar? I think there's a lot of synergy here in just planning and preparing, for your project, right? So this works with renovation projects. This works with new builds. Is truly sitting down and mapping out beginning to end of what you want your goal to be. I usually ask the $1 million question: what's your style, right? What style are you trying to achieve? And then I'll ask, clients or even myself, I'll start kind of finding inspiration photos, right, on houses and things like that will kind of at least get me in a sector that is kind of going this direction, right, with style. You mentioned that yesterday with one of your, having the mindset now of being in that Casa Linda area, and you're like, oh, there's a lot of Spanish influence and things like that. So I'd like to do that, at some point. So, but knowing that genre and kind of sticking to it and then pre-planning ahead, because the speed is all about how much you prepare, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about how much you've prepared ahead of time, the design choices, ordering things way ahead of the time that you can visually see those things in place, your cabinets, for instance, things that take a long time. So it's knowing, right. Fabrication timelines, right? And things like that. Like I told you, I'm floating on the boat in the Caribbean and get a hold of my countertop guy. And I'm like, hey, show up over there, template it, send me what you got. This is my budget. And he sends me a couple pictures. I'm like, done, template it. Let's get it going. Right. So, I mean, we already know what it is. And now I can build around that because I've already selected countertops. I've already selected fireplace, marble and stuff like that. And then this week is tile, right? And I already know my paint colors. I already kind of know the genre. So it's a lot easier to make these decisions ahead of time, and then pre-ordering, plumbing fixtures and things like that. And we talked about that a little bit just on your last project, right? Of knowing,
Mhm.
your contractor put in Kohler valves,
Right. Yeah.
and once you
Yeah.
realize that, it was like, oh no, now you're stuck in Kohler, and it's one of the most expensive
Yeah.
plumbing fixtures out there. And you were limited, right? Because you were stuck in that deal. So, but going along with that, with Jessica, just I'm interested in the timelines, like what your expectations are for somebody, when they're doing this themselves, because I feel like this is, well, it could be good, but it could also be bad. Like somebody with your experience or my experience building it ourselves, I feel pretty confident in doing it in a very,
Right.
efficient
Right.
timeline. But, when you rely on a builder that's done it 100 times, if they give you their focus, then yes, they should be pretty efficient with their time as well. We had George Roddy Jr. on a couple weeks ago, and he has a company called Rosso Homes, and they pride themselves on being able to build a home, from the slab to finish in 100 days. Um, and this is 3,500 square foot home with 2-car garage, and they could do it in
Wow.
100 days. And it's just mind blowing, right?
Right.
And they do a great job. It's quality. It's just they've got their systems, and they've got their
Right.
systems, and they got their projections ahead of time. Obviously, through COVID and the things that we had with supply issues a couple years ago, that wasn't the case. And their hands were tied. With the supply issues that we had. But I'd be curious, just kind of what are some of those expectations that you put out there,
Okay. Yeah.
and what does that look like?
I'd say like 75% of the people who are owner building or building one of our floor plans have to get a construction loan. And so usually construction loans, you have to be finished building within a year, 12 months. And so
Okay.
we advise our owner builders to aim for like 8 or 9 months. That way, when there's delays, you don't have to stress too much. You still have 3 or 4 months of buffer. And if you do go over that timeline, it's not the end of the world. You just are going to have to pay a fee or something. So we do tell people aim low and then, stay on top of it. We give them, it's a book. It's like a 90-page book with the entire construction process laid out and how long each step should take. And it's kind of a low end and a high end. For instance, we have found in talking to a lot of people and in our own experience that the framers will always tell you it's going to be 3 weeks, and it's typically 3 months. So from a ground up. So that's just, it seems like from talking to people, that's the story we always get. And that's the exact story that we had. So both times we built. So it's kind of having an optimistic outlook, but a pessimistic, sort of realistic in your mind number. So yeah, awesome. You can do it in 3 weeks, framers. That would be fantastic. And then just really, I believe in you. You're going to do it. Let's get this done in 3 weeks. But knowing in your head, it's probably going to be 3 months, and not to stress about it because you have that time built into your timeline. So,
Right.
and then, so we're aiming for 8 or 9 months. It's usually probably going to be like 10. But that's usually what owner builders can do, is average of about 9 or 10. So both of our builds.
And average,
But I know from
average square footage would be what that you're helping these people build. What's about
Probably
the average?
Probably the average is 3,000 square feet.
Okay. And then another big question is, how are you getting the banks to approve this type of process?
That is a good question. And that is probably the number one question. I posted on Instagram one time. The first time I mentioned that we owner built, like my comments were filled with, "How'd you get a loan? Owners can't be builders. You can't get a loan with the bank. How'd you finance it?" Like every single one of them. And so that is the big one. I would say we we have a list in our program of banks that lend, or lenders that lend to people who want to own or build, in each state. And then some of them are like nationwide lenders. And then, we definitely suggest that you work on your credit score, get your credit score as high as you possibly can before you try to apply for the loan. And we give you basically a breakdown of how to make yourself look like a sure bet to the lender, so that you are going in, putting your best foot forward. You're showing them that you know what you're doing. We kind of talk about things in your past, even if you've never worked in construction. You have probably hired a plumber. You've probably hired an electrician. You maybe have even done a renovation project in your house. So we kind of brainstorm those things that could be like experience in the construction industry that you can put forth to the lenders and show that you do have experience. And we give you a loan application checklist. There's 11 things on it that you want to include in your loan application, so that you not only can show them that you know what you're doing, but you actually look better than some of the GCs that are applying for loans. Because a lot of GCs applying for loans are not organized. They just, scratch some stuff on paper and turn that in. And they're just relying on the fact that they have a license to get this loan. But you're going to be organized. You're going to show them how you've got a schedule, you've got a budget, you've got it all laid out. You know exactly, you might even know what toilet you're going to put in your guest bathroom at this point. Because in order to get your budget numbers, you have already probably started calling subcontractors and getting kind of rough bids for things, and so that you can have a number in your budget to show to the bank. And so basically, by the time you get your construction loan application completed, you've done almost all the planning that you need to do for your build. And you probably know which contractor you want to go with. You probably know what kind of flooring you want to use. You know all of this stuff. It's already picked out. Now it's just time to get that loan and get it built. So that's how we lay it out for people. Does that help?
That's
Nice.
awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great for me. I didn't
also,
know that was even a thing. So
Good.
And Jessica, for you, with 90,000 followers that you have, I imagine you're getting pulled in several different states. Are you running into different challenges with processes and requirements and things like that from the city? And some places need
Right.
architectural plans that are stamped. I mean, I guess that's where you come in and play that. But does your architectural license allow you to stamp plans in other states? Is that something that's universal, or how does that work?
Most states don't require an architectural stamp drawing for residential. As long as it's not over a certain amount of square footage or over like 4 stories, you don't have to have. Actually, I think that's all the states. Now, if you go bigger or higher, then you're probably going to have at least an engineering stamp, which, because I'm working with people all over the country, I tell them you need to go to an engineer locally who knows your local codes and your local conditions. Like California, I have a client in California, and I told them you need to go to a California structural engineer and have your foundation engineered, your house engineered by someone in California, because they're going to know your seismic issues and wind loads and things like that, snow loads. So I tell everybody, when you order stock plans, you want to have your house looked over by an engineer, no matter where you are, because there are so many different conditions all across the country. And I can't design one house that meets all of those conditions. And nobody wants to have all those conditions built into their house because it would cost unnecessary money. So definitely something good to do is to have an engineer look over those and stamp those.
And that's a great word. Even local and everything I've worked with and any designs that I do now for people, that's where I go from that. Is hey, we'll design the plans, we'll design the floor plan and the elevations, etc., and then give this over to an engineer, and then let them do the foundation design, let them do the framing plan.
Right. And it's not as costly as you think it's going to be to have that engineered, and but the peace of mind that you're going to have knowing that it was designed specifically for your site. Because even if you take a core sample from, here and then move 10 feet over there, you may have completely different soil. So
Yep.
that's how much, things vary. So you want to have it engineered for your specific site.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
why don't I start wrapping it up a little bit? So, all right. So as we are kind of wrapping up a little bit, Jessica, there's been a ton of awesome information. Of course, you guys have, like you said, 20-page book, and you've got all sorts of resources. So I want to leave plenty of time because, if someone, called me up and said, hey, how can you help me? I was like, well, I can be your realtor or I can flip a house and we can work together.
Right.
If someone calls Jessica, it sounds like there's a lot of ways that you can connect with people, help people. I know you'll have the building program. I know you do design work. So please talk a little bit about, your customer facing stuff. How do people reach out to you? What are the programs you offer, and that sort of thing? So everyone kind of knows how they can, get a little bit of a piece of the Jessica Star, magic on the plans and on the Instagram page, because her stuff does look beautiful.
Thank
and
you.
if you haven't checked it out yet, you have to for sure find her on Instagram. But tell us a little bit about some of the programs you got, Jessica.
Okay. My website is oldbarncompany.com, and on there you'll find our floor plans, our information about it's called Bootstrap Builders, is our owner builder course program. And then you'll also we have blog posts about, like, one recent one I did about shutters, do's and don'ts, and then how we also built our shutters. There's a tutorial there. And there's some design considerations, some articles about how to save money while building. One very popular article is must-haves in your next home. So, there's things we go into, like, detail about, like, this specific outlet you want in your next home, things like that. So there's lots of good articles on that website. The floor plans are on the website. I also have a YouTube, which is, I believe, Old Barn Company on YouTube. And on there, we have tours of our own house, but we've also traveled across the country and toured 6, 7, 8, I don't know how many homes that people have built using my plans. So we share those on the YouTube channel. And then on Instagram, cool. It's the.old.barn on Instagram. And I just share, I don't know, random stuff every day. Sometimes it's just like, the dog sitting on the chair. But there's tours on there. You can see snippets of my house all over that page. I also share other builds of the floor plans on there. So there's, you can see, this person built this house. This person built this house. I'll share little snippets on there, especially in the stories. I'll share the other people who have built the plans. And so, that's where you can find me.
Well, and pretty soon, my understanding is you can also see your house in a national ad campaign for Francesca's, the jewelry company. Is that correct? Is this rumor correct?
That is correct. Francesca's came to our house in October, and they made it snow here with fake snow everywhere. And they did a winter campaign. And so, you'll see our house on the Francesca's. It's on their Instagram page, but I think they have probably a catalog or something that they're going to come up with too. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So check that out. And just as a bonus, if you go onto the Instagram, you will also get really good tips on making decorated Christmas cookies, because the Star family, on top of being famous for their house and their design plans, they are equally as famous for their very intricate Christmas cookies. Every year, it seems to get more and more elaborate and competitive. And so maybe at some point that will take over and you'll have a whole course on how to do that, because you guys are super legit when it comes to that, and it's a lot of fun. So you definitely want to check that out. So, well, man, Jessica, like, honestly, I think we just got going and scratching the surface on how to, build. It's so intricate, and there's so many ways you can tweak, and, everyone does it slightly differently. Every GC does it slightly differently. So there's a lot of variables, but it's really cool that you guys have put a framework together to say, look, here's how you do it. you're going to have success if you just follow the plan, and here you can get a loan and all that. So really, really cool that you've done that. So as far as I am concerned, you can find me on Instagram. I'm the Dallas Real Estate Guy. I'm on Facebook. Tavis, why don't you let people know where they can find you?
I'm Tavis, like Travis without the R. Tavis Westbrook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. Yeah. So I'm out there on the social media platforms. Of course, check out our YouTube page. Ashton's doing a great job building this and putting this together at the Real Estate Heavyweights podcast YouTube page. So we are slowly growing this, but yeah, I mean, I think this is pretty awesome. We're creeping up on 30 episodes already. So fun stuff.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And y'all are so good at this.
Yeah.
Y'all, I mean, I'm just amazed. Every time I see you, I'm like, he is such a natural at this. It's so good. So I love watching.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jessica. This
was
a great addition to our show today, and really diving deep into, building your team and kind of the nuts and bolts behind the construction side of things and the design piece, and that's something that is obviously a major connector in the investment world, as well as, the consumer world and people building their dreams. So keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. And you've got patience of Job for sure to put this whole thing together, because it's not easy. It's not easy, one, for yourself, and then to be able to put this out to the general public and coach them through it. It's quite challenging. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back this next Friday with another edition of our DFW Market Update. So tune in there. Keep an eye open for our stuff on Instagram and YouTube, and we really appreciate it. Love you so much. Talk to you soon.